traditional territory of the Musqueam Coast Salish First Nation. Their traditional lands covered most of the area around Vancouver, especially on where the university is, as well as Richmond and adjacent areas. And to the north we have other Coast Salish peoples as well, whose territory is shared in some cases. But these are people who have lived in this area for thousands and thousands of years and have built up tremendous knowledge and wisdom about living well in the place. I can't really begin to pay enough tribute to the people who have been my teachers over this time. And some of them have now passed on, but to me they're still here. I can still see their faces, I can hear them, I can hear their voices. And many of them are still with us today. I just had lunch yesterday with Ron Ignace, the corner holding choke chair. He's the elected chief of the Skeetchiston band of the Shuswap Nation. Dr. Richard Atleo was the first Indigenous doctoral student to complete at UBC. And he lives out of Chilliwack now, but he's from the Hausa First Nation out on the West Coast. All of these people, I could just talk about each one of them for the entire time and tell you stories about my times out in the field with them and what they've taught and how they've passed along their knowledge to their family members, many of whom I still keep in touch with. And of course, I really love the idea of being out there with elders and kids together, because it's wonderful to see the joy of learning that is embodied in the kids as they go through their daily activities, harvesting seaweed and so forth. And that reminds me, I brought along some of the seaweed, and I'll start passing it around. It's going to take a while, and you have to share just one bag, but feel free to help yourself to it and taste it. I can confirm that it's edible. Maybe I should try eating it. But this is the kind of seaweed that I'll be talking about later, Pyropia abati, and it's one that's very, very important on the coast, but people have great concerns about it, because this year, for the first time ever, it didn't appear on the rocks like that. Every year it has. This year, there were just little strands of it, and people are saying that's the impact of climate change. I was just up in Hartley Bay in September, and that's where the seaweed came from, by the way. And they were able to pick some, but just not as much as they would normally get. So these kids now, that was taken maybe about 8 years ago. They're all grown up now. It's amazing how fast those kids grow. So the whole idea of writing that book was on ancient pathways, ancestral knowledge. I started thinking quite a while ago, actually, about learning all of this rich knowledge from different places, mostly within British Columbia, but within Northwestern North America, the names and the stories and the ways of cooking and the ways of harvesting. And I guess what came to me is how much commonality there is in the way that people relate to plants and their environments across this huge area, across linguistic boundaries, across geographic boundaries. So, and the richness of their knowledge of all of these individuals, the elders I've worked with, where did it come from? How did they learn it? You know, who discovered it to begin with? How did they pass it on? How did they share it? How did they adapt it across time and space? And so the whole idea of working on that book was to try and puzzle it out, how that happened, ways that, what are the pathways, for example. I'll start with a quick story and then just talk a little bit about sharing knowledge and associated methods and beliefs and so forth. Give a few examples and then some conclusions. So we'll get started. There's a lot of diversity in the way people use plants throughout Northwestern North America, but there are also commonalities. And so the question is, how did this situation come to be? How did people share their stories and their ceremonies and the way they look after plants, the way they divide up the work, the way they teach? How did it develop? Here's my friend Celia, Belinda Claxton, harvesting cedar bark, which is a great example. It seems from the palynology, now some of you might correct me here, that Western red cedar, Thuya plicata, has only been really common on the coast, especially on the north coast, within the last 5,000 or so years, maybe even less. And so the question is, cedar is so important to coastal First Peoples now. What did they do before there was cedar? And how did they learn how to use cedar? And when? And where? How did they share that? So there it all is. There are several hundred different species of plants that have names in all of the different languages in Northwestern North America, and a lot of animal and seafood species as well, fish and insects, birds, mammals, names for hundreds of different species. And of course, associated with that is all of this knowledge that I'm talking about. And that's the book. Take a look at this, the photos on the covers of the two volumes. Their hands that are twisting, and the hands belong to Sam Mitchell, who was one of the main teachers I worked with when I was doing my doctoral work. And I'm really happy to see a couple of plant collections over here that I made when I was working with Sam Mitchell on different varieties of Saskatoon berries, which they call slocum. Well, Sam's showing how to make rope with a kind of willow called nutritious, Salix exigua. So this shows that. And I was really delighted when the designer decided to use that on the covers of the book, because I have such fond memories of Sam and all of his teachings. And I'll show you a little bit later at the end the full picture of Sam making that robe. So there are approximately 50 languages and major dialects spoken from the central Alaska and the Yukon, south to the Columbia River and east to the Rocky Mountains. And within that same region, of course, there's a tremendous diversity of geography and vegetation, many different vegetation zones, and within those different habitats that provide different kinds of plant resources for people. And so you put that all together in a time frame, you're going to get a lot of diversity here. And the first thing that I did when I started working on this book was to make a database of plant names in all of those 50 languages and major dialects. And guess which plant had names in all 50? It was wild rose. Now, there were several species, I have to admit. There's the Nootka rose on the northwest coast, and the prickly rose, Rosa acicularis in the interior, and Rosa woodsii, a smaller flowered rose, but pretty much the same. Places where more than one species occurs, people would call them by the same name, though you recognize the differences. So it's sort of a complex name, and it covers multiple species, but one kind of thing, really. I was using the names in a way as proxies for knowledge. If a name is shared across two languages, it indicates that there's some kind of connection between them, obviously, more than just independent discovery, because you're not going to have the same name if two people are different groups of people are using the same plant, but discovered it independently. So, for example, with the rose, not surprisingly, a lot of the names, especially in the Athabascan languages, refer to the thorns. So huas is an Athabascan term that means thorn. Huascho means big thorn. And you can see the different Athabascan language names, all in blue, have a similar kind of related term. And then you have the Tsimshianic names are related, Niska and Tsimshian. And you might know the town called Lac Rolams. That's the place of the wild rose off Prince Rupert. Some more names, you can see the Salishan names in green, and then in the interior, a different etamon, they call it, a different, completely different name. So I just want to talk a little bit about this sharing idea that goes on even to the present day. But there's Sam Mitchell in the middle of two of his buddies. Sam was from Hatcha, or what used to be called Fountain, up in the Fraser Canyon. And his friends, Charlie Mack and Baptist Ritchie, are from Mount Currie, Lilwa. And down in the bottom, is Arthur Adolph, who is Sam's adopted son. And he is still a good friend of ours, and I see him from time to time. So Art told this story of when he was a little boy, he grew up with his grandfather, Sam, and his grandmother, Susan, Sam's wife. And Susan used to organize trips by the train, by the old PGE rail from Lillooet down to Mount Currie. And Susan and Art and Sam and a group of people, maybe a dozen, would go down there and they'd meet their relatives from Mount Currie, and they'd all take the train up to Whistler area, Alta Lake, and they'd spend time up in cabins, and they'd go up and pick mountain huckleberries, that seeming membranacea mostly, and some of the other blueberries of the Montane region. And when they got back, Susan would always make sure that everyone in the Hatchet community got their own berries, even the ones who weren't able to go and pick. And then a little while later, or maybe the next year, maybe earlier, the Mount Currie folks would come up by the train, and Sam and family would pick them up, and they'd take them up into the Fountain Valley to pick scotium, the soapberry. And again, they'd bring the soapberries back to Mount Currie, and they'd share them around down there. So that was just one example of two groups of people with connections across them who would travel back and forth and exchange knowledge and exchange goods with each other as part of a sort of ongoing arrangement. That's something that we wrote a paper about called Ecological Edges and Cultural Edges. This would be an example of a cultural edge. It's not a physical thing, but it's a place where different groups of people come together and exchange knowledge and ideas. So our friend Dolly Watts she now lives on Vancouver Island, but she's Big Sam. She is a chef, and she talked about how important these goods were for sharing, bartering, trading as a gift for a gift. Trade included sharing land that had a profusion of berries or hunting grounds full of game, as there was an abundance of seafood on the coast, and similarly, an excess of meat and berries among the Gixans. The exchange offered variety in our diets. My friend Helen Clifton from Hartley Bay, I was just talking to her about that. She was remembering how people would come down the Skeena River and bring soap berries and Saskatoon berries down and trade them for their dried halibut and clams. Lulican grease and seaweed are two of those. There's Helen right there with her granddaughter Janelle, and she's teaching Janelle how to process the dried halibut there. I love that picture because to me it is so illustrative of how knowledge is passed on. Children learn by doing, learn by experience, and they probably don't even know that they're learning. Janelle's in her late teens now. That was taken a long time ago, 2003, I think. So all of these different concepts and were exchanged, learned, and adapted. Not just the goods themselves, but the knowledge about how to harvest them, how to process them, and implements that were used and so forth. So the technique of making twine, for example, and the kind of fiber that people use. And I have as an illustration the design of digging sticks. These are root diggers that are an amazing implement. They're sort of like a shovel, but you don't really use them like a shovel. It's more like a lever, where you push them into the ground and you pry, and you push them in and pry back until you get a big area like this of turf, and then you push in really hard and you flip the whole thing over. And there are your edible roots, your camas balls or your clover or whatever it is that you're digging. You can just select the big ones and leave the little ones behind, flip it back over, pull a few of the weedy grasses out. Sorry, Jack. And, yeah, Bob's your uncle. So there are these different designs of digging sticks, and I've just shown you a couple. One made of the root there, made of yew wood. The one leaning against the birch tree is black hawthorn, made by my friend Mary Thomas. And Adam Dick, my friend from the Quapaquak Nation, is using one of the yew wood digging sticks. And the ones in the red background, I'll talk about in a minute. But all of these things, the processes and the knowledge that goes with them are what is shared. And I just had the most amazing experience this August, going out with a group from Bella Coola. And it took me all these years, since 1972, to try and figure out what this sweet-smelling grass that Dave Moody told me about back in 1972 that grew down in the river estuary. And I didn't know what it was, and I wrote in my thesis, this sweet grass that people use in ceremony. Well, it turns out this is Dave Moody's son, Sam Moody, who's a well-known herbalist, and he knew about the grass from his dad, and other people in the Bella Coola community learned about it, and they said they learned about sweetgrass long ago from people from Alberta who came out, the Blackfeet people, who came out and taught them about sweetgrass, and they have it growing all over the estuary in Bella Coola, and I didn't even know it, because it's not flowering. There's no fruits or flowers with it. It's just mixed in amongst all the other grasses. So, you know, I don't know how far back that knowledge goes or when they learned about it, but there's a good example of how a ceremonial product has been shared. We sure had fun that day. And as I mentioned, the botanical vocabulary is a great reflection, a proxy for a whole knowledge system, really. The names that people give. The very fact that people give a name to a plant indicates that it has some cultural importance to those people. And most of you, well, some of you will know tons and tons of names of plants. But a lot of you, unless you're professional botanists, you probably maybe know maybe 500 or maybe 1,000 names, but no more than that. There's lots of plants that you probably don't know the names for because they're not so salient for you. And that's the same with the First Nations. You can tell which plants are important by the ones that have names attached to them. So I'm just going to give you a few examples quickly of a few of these names. So these are the species I'm going to talk about. Ocean spray, Holobiscus, discolor. Have a look at the shishak, Squamish names and Sputlium. They all mean digging stick plant. And it's one of the plants that is used to make digging sticks. In the interior, it comes from a word, well, nobody really knows whether This is a folk etymology. That is a false meaning for a name that was attributed, but it seems to be named for blonde color, which is the color of the flowers. And that name has been used throughout the interior Salish area. As well, it has the cognate on the post with the Nukal and Comox. And this Sagittarius, we have a sample here, is particularly interesting because they made this amazing discovery in 2009, I think it was, not that long ago, of these almost a pure patch of Waikato, Sagittaria, at Pit Polder when they were digging the foundations for the new bridge there in the Cape Sea territory. And when they tested, they found them mixed in with the ends of these digging sticks, which you can see down there. And when they tested them, 3,500 years old. And they were associated with camp areas and hearth sites, so people were camping there, harvesting Waikato 3,500 years ago, just up the Fraser Valley from here. And the names, I didn't even realize the interior people used Waikato until I started working with Mary Thomas, Shrapnel elder who lived at Salmonar. And she said, yeah, we used to go down and get this tuber, like a marble, she said, and our granny would dig it and throw it up on the bank. And we called it popolos, which means yellow, jaundiced yellow eyeball. And then when I started doing this comparison, lo and behold, popolos is related to not just to the neighboring Katmuk people, the Thompson, but also to Squamish and upriver Alcomagnum, or Stolo. But there's also another set of names, scouts and things like that, that are now used for potato. So it just shows how things can evolve over time. Then this is a neat one. Camas, both species, Camassia quamash and Lactini, and naughty onion and other onions, have a similar ancient root name, Polaj, which means edible tuber in Proto-Salish, the earliest ancestral language of the Salish. And so in one direction, on Vancouver Island and down into the Puget Sound, the name sort of got transferred to Camassia. But up in the interior, it got transferred to onion. And so Palawaul, the real original onion, is this Latino name, which I learned about when I was doing my doctoral work. But until I saw the whole pattern of how these names are related across time and space, I didn't realize just, how amazing it was and how ancient this knowledge must be. Here's the seaweed that I'm passing around. I hope you're enjoying the taste of it, wherever it is. And this is how it's dried up in this keel at the seaweed camp. And lo and behold, the name is a common name, etymon, is used from the Yupik people up in Alaska, right down to the Straight Salish and Lummi in Puget Sound. Some variant of Shakston, Shaks, or Shakas. But it's all a related term. It means that at some point, people were exchanging the knowledge of edible seaweed up and down the coast. It would have been quite a long time ago. And another one is the silkberry, which again I learned from Sam Mitchell, learned how to use it, this potion, how it was whipped into a foamy, really delicious, for some of us, frothy food. It has a slight bitter taste to it, just as a word. But these names are really neat. They come from, there's only a few different original terms. One is a Sintianic name, is or us, borrowed into Skidegate Haida, which I learned about, us, which I didn't realize was borrowed from the Sintianic languages, because the Masset Haida name, Hokuklate, is not related at all. It's borrowed from Tlingit. But anyways, some of the Athabasca names like Ish Goji, that means Ish berry. I know that because my Kalpan name is Chicha Ekadam, which means berry woman. I'm rather proud of that name. But look at this. All 18 Salish names, every single Salish language has the same name for its word, derived from the original Proto-Salish hos, or hos, which means foaming or frothing. Isn't that neat? So, well, that's the summary. I don't want to go into that because I'm going to run out of time. But it's pretty interesting how this amazing fruit that in the rest of Canada people think of it as being poisonous. Here in Northwestern North America, in British Columbia, it's like an amazing party food that people talk about. There's even a Haida word, acha, which means smeared with soap berries. So you can imagine. So how did soap berries become so popular? I think it's a very, very ancient fruit. You find it in the Yukon now, grows right across northern Canada in the boreal forest. I think it's one of the first fruits that people learned about, and somehow that idea of whipping it into a foamy froth caught on here, but not in the rest of the continent. Skunk cabbage, another one I just love, and there's lots of neat things about skunk cabbage. One thing is you should not eat it. Don't eat the leaves of skunk cabbage. They have sharp crystals of calcium oxalate in them, and they'll get embedded in your tongue and swell it up and make it very miserable for you. I haven't tried it, but I've had accounts from people who have, including our friend Allison, right? Anyways, but the leaves get really big. They can get this tall, this wide, and you can dry berries on them because they have a waxy coating on the surface. You can see how shiny they are. And so they make an excellent surface for laying food on or drying berries on and that kind of thing. And the rhizomes are sometimes used as a famine food and have been in the past. They have to be roasted and cooked to get rid of that peppery flavor, but nevertheless, they were used and associated with food in times of scarcity by some people. So you can see there's a whole raft of names from the Wakashan language, which would be the Kwakwala and Haisla, that have borrowed the Proto-Salish word for skunk cabbage. And then all of the Salish peoples have this related terms that come from the Proto-Salish term "po." But there's a whole other etymon that is really intriguing to me because I first learned about it when I was working in the west coast of Vancouver Island. The name Timat or Tinat or Tibut in Dididat. Then I learned you go over to the east, you skip a whole area where they use that other name, and you go to Shwetmuk, the Shuswap area, the Okanagan, the Coeur d'Alene, and Spokane, and the Salish or Flathead people over in Montana, and even the Tinaha, which is a totally different language, have borrowed this term, Timat or Tumu or Timat. And how did that happen? I can only suggest that maybe they all met down at the mouth of the Columbia River and exchanged that name along with the knowledge of how to use the plant. And there's neat stories. There's a Haida story about a skunk cabbage man who actually provided a family that was in need with a boy would go out and he saw a ditch being dug and he went there the next day and it had salmon in it. And the next day it had 2 salmon. And he found out the person who was giving them the salmon was skunk cabbage man. And then you go down to the mouth of the Columbia, and Francois recorded this amazing story about the people in the ancient times before the salmon came up the river. All they had to eat was wapato and skunk cabbage. And when the salmon people came, they saw this person over on the bank. They went over and the person said, if it hadn't been for me, the people would have starved. And that was skunk cabbage. And so they said in the story, so they gave skunk cabbage an elk skin blanket and a war club. And that's why skunk cabbage is so beautiful today. So how did those two stories get connected? They are connected in a way with similar themes. So far apart by the wide Columbia River. And then just one more example to wind up with. The whole notion of cooking in an underground pit. We know, of course, that Polynesians did that, and the Hawaiians have done that. In North America, we know that in Chile they do pit cooking. And in Mexico, they pit cooked agave. And it seems that the earliest archaeological record for North America was in Texas, maybe going back 8,000 or 9,000 years ago. And gradually the idea of pit cooking seemed to have moved north because it came into the Willamette Valley about 6,000 years ago, and then up into central Washington about 5,000 years ago. And then, you can tell about pit cooking from the archaeological record, which is a kind of a dip in the ground. It looks like a cattle wallow or something, but it has charred wood and firecracked rock in it, and sometimes remains of plants like camas. And so in British Columbia, we have all of these records of pit cooking going back maybe 3,000 years max. So it seems like that tradition started in North America from the south and moved up north. But there's still a lot to be found, a lot to know about. But these are some of the foods that people have pit cooked. And like the camas is well known. It's almost always pit cooked. And the main carbohydrate, inulin, is broken down during the pit cooking process into fructans and fructose, which are very digestible and sweet tasty. Otherwise, camas, if you just ate it raw, it's really pasty and sort of mucilaginous, and it's not very digestible either. The same with the onions. Palawa'u, the noggin onions here, they would braid them and cook them in a pit. One of the neatest things that we learned from my master's students, to Crawford, who worked with Trevor Goward, some of you know Trevor, he did his master's looking at black tree lichen, Bryoria fremonti, and he was assumed that pit cooking, because the lichens always pit cooked, would break down the lichen carbohydrates into something more digestible. But he couldn't break them down, no matter what he did. He tried all kinds of methods. One of the things he did was cook them with camas balls and onions. And guess what? He found that the lichen absorbed about 30% of the fructans from the camas and the onions that would have otherwise been lost into the pit cook material. And so in essence, the lichen helped people to increase the efficiency of their harvest of the edible roots. It's pretty neat stuff. There's lots more stories about pit cooking. I wish I could tell you more. But it's time to close. You might have some questions. So just in conclusion then, I believe that sharing this knowledge helps people to adapt. It helps them to be resilient, to respond to change and to different things that present themselves to them. Having access to a variety of different products that you can count on, you can trade, or you know where you can go and get if you need to. And that the common names across the languages are a good indicator of widespread cultural importance of these species and widespread sharing of knowledge, practice, and belief. And there is Sam twisting the rope willow at a place called Pavilion along the highway between Lytton and Cache Creek. Unfortunately, they widened the highway and the whole population of the sandbar willow was wiped out at that spot. And Sam may well be one of the last people who knew how to make that rope, because they used it for tying their houses together, making rafts, suspension bridges to go across the Fraser River. Can you imagine? And I mentioned at the bottom, key spiritual and ethical dimensions are also involved, allowing long-term sustainability and adaptability. And I put the picture of the grouse mask here. That is a mask that belongs to our friend, Clan Chief Adam Dick Waxistala. And it is part of a dance, a ceremonial dance that he has the prerogative to present, about a boy who went out and hunted grouse, and they're so easy to kill. He killed a whole bunch of them. He was pretty proud of himself for killing all these grouse. But when he got home, he went to sleep, and he had a dream. And in the dream, the door of the forest came and opened up to him. And all of the different elements of the forest came and danced before him. Each one has a mask. There are about 20 masks in this dance. The grouse was the first, and then came the trees, and the fish, and the birds, and the wind, and the water, and emotions, and aging. All of these had their own masks and birth. And, by the time he witnessed all of these different elements of the forest and how connected they were, and how important the grouse was to the ecosystem there, he realized that he had taken too many grouse, and he learned his lesson. And that, whenever that dance is performed, it conveys that lesson to anybody who's watching it. I told Adam, it's sort of like a whole course in forest ecology in 1 hour. And I just want to emphasize that this knowledge that I'm talking about, it's not dead. It's not in the past. It's still being transmitted and used, maybe in different ways, and people are using different modes of communication, like YouTube and apps and things. But still, it's really important today, and all of the people that I work with are trying really hard to maintain and sustain their languages and their traditional food systems and their lands and the integrity of the lands, and to keep looking after them as their ancestors did.